Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nature Source Care. My name is Dr. Funda Goleman, and I am a naturopathic physician. Today, I was going to talk about the Ayurvedic perspective on pain. And before I start the talk, I just wanted to thank everybody for all of their support. People have been leaving some really great comments about how my videos have helped them. So that's really fantastic. I'm so glad that my work is helpful to viewers and everybody who subscribes to the channel, likes videos, sends in donations. I really appreciate all that feedback about the work I do here. So thank you for all of that. All right, let's go ahead. A note beforehand, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. For any symptoms that are severe or worsening, please contact a qualified healthcare professional. It is always important to determine the root cause of any disease and to develop a comprehensive treatment plan. Individual cases can vary in terms of treatments that are most effective, and solo therapies may not be appropriate or effective in all cases. So please keep that all in mind as we go through. Okay, so just a couple words. First, if you're not familiar with Ayurveda, what is it? So, Ayurveda is also known as traditional Indian medicine, and it's more than 5,000 years old. So, it's really a whole different paradigm of medicine from modern Western medicine. It's holistic in nature, and it's also energetic in nature. So, you really kind of, to get into the system, you really have to think about people and symptoms and diseases and states of health as different kinds of energies. That really helps a lot. So, what I'm going to be talking about today in terms of this subject of pain is that there are three main energies. They're also known as doshas in Ayurveda, and you can translate doshas as imbalances. And these three energies are kind of the main causes of disease in somebody. Okay. So we have vata, pitta, and kapha. Vata, I loosely translate as wind. Pitta, I loosely translate as fire. And kapha, I loosely translate as earth. Okay. So if you think about, let's intuitively think about wind, fire, and earth, they're very different types of elements. So wind, like right now in the northern hemisphere, or at least where I live, we're in autumn. It's the windy season, so there's a lot of wind. It's cold. It's dry. There's a lot of movement of the trees. Leaves are falling, that sort of thing. And so, when we look at people and the symptoms they're experiencing, when we see symptoms that are cold, dry, light, moving, they're in a windy state or a vata state. Okay, when somebody's experiencing a pitta or a kind of excessive pitta state or fire state, fire is intense and it's spreading and it's hot. Also in Ayurveda, this may not seem so intuitive, is that there's also this sense of there is some wetness associated with fire, which you might think, well, water puts out fire, but you might think of wetness as almost oil, because oil will definitely, right? So it's not just liquids that put out fire, but some liquids, accelerate the fire and its intensity and its transformative properties. And then we have kapha or earth. And the nature of earth is it's cold, it's heavy, it's wet, it's steady, and that's why you can build things from it like bricks and marble and things like that. Okay, so those are the three main energies or doshas, and I'll be talking about them more as we go through. But when we, first of all, we figure out with a person which main dosha, or a lot of people have a combination of doshas that they're experiencing, then the way that we balance vata, pitta, and kapha is that we introduce the opposite qualities. So again, if we're talking about vata, which is cold and dry and moving, cold and dry and moving, we want to warm up somebody. We want to kind of moisturize tissues. We want to get people to rest and slow down so that that wind calms down. Yeah. So that's a basic intro in about 2 minutes of Ayurveda and the doshas. All right, so now let's continue on. We have a little introduction on the doshas, and we're going to be talking about the dhatus as they relate to pain from this Ayurvedic perspective. And dhatus means tissues. Okay. Pain in Ayurveda in Sanskrit is dukkha, and you can translate dukkha as both pain as well as suffering. So something of the body as well as potentially something of the mind and the emotions. Okay. So all pain involves some sort of vata imbalance, some sort of wind imbalance. The reason why, even if it's not the primary or the most out of balance dosha, it is always involved because vata is about movement. It's a moving energy. And so when there's pain, it means that there's either a lack of movement of prana, which is a vital energy, sort of the life force, vital life force, or there's a deficiency. There's not enough life force. And so the tissues are depleted and not well fed and nourished, that sort of thing, or the energy is blocked. So, what can block prana? Well, pitta, excess kapha, so too much fire, too much earth, or ama, also known as toxins, can block the free flowing movement of prana and block vata, prana, and then we end up with pain. Okay. So again, pain can be either physical or mental, emotional. And when we're talking about, again, this idea of blocking vital energy and that sort of thing, you might think of mental and emotional pain as undigested experiences where you haven't been able to, in your mind and your heart, process an experience and take away the learning and leave behind the grievances, which again is especially depending on how deep and intense experiences can be. That can you might need support in doing that because some things are just hard to really fully process, or sometimes there's so much pain, mental pain, that the mind tries to protect the organism, the body, from more pain by sort of compartmentalizing it. But even though that works in the short term, the pain, that suffering, that blockage is still there, and it typically pops up at other times down the road when somebody experiences another trauma. So, in any case, I do have another video that I have talked more about Ayurvedic psychology and the different doshas and that sort of thing. So that might be of interest to you. That's available. The other thing is I mentioned dhatus or tissues. So in Ayurveda, there are 7 different dhatus or tissues. So it's a different sort of categorization than the Western system. And again, these are also not just physical in nature, but they're also energetic in nature. So please keep that in mind. All right, so there are 7 tissues. There's rasa dhatu, or you can kind of think of that as the lymph, again, loosely translated. It's not exact, but you can kind of think of that as lymph tissue or lymph fluid. There's rakta dhatu, or blood. That's fairly similar. Then there's mamsa and medha dhatus. Mamsa is muscle, and medha is adipose or fat tissue. Then there's asthi dhatu, or bones. That also includes joints. And then there's majja dhatu, or the nervous system. And then there's shukra and artava dhatu. Shukra is the male reproductive system, and artava is the female reproductive system. So when we have pain in these different tissues, we'll experience this imbalance of vata dhatu as well as the blockage or deficiency of prana in these different tissues. So if the blockage or deficiency is mostly in the rasa dhatu, or the lymphatic fluid, or the lymphatic tissue, then you'll experience generalized pain throughout the body. If instead you are experiencing some sort of burning or bleeding, it might show up like on the skin typically. This might be, this typically is a imbalance of vata dhatu, and a blockage or deficiency of prana in the blood. Because typically, especially if there's burning or bleeding, that usually indicates that there's an excess of pitta or fire energy. Okay. In the mamsa, medha, muscle adipose tissues, when you get this blockage occurring, you'll have muscular pain, like when you have a viral infection or something like that, right? When you get achy from a virus, yeah. Asti dhatu, when there's a blockage there, you'll have pain in the joints, especially, and the bones, like arthritis. Majja dhatu, the nervous tissue, when you have pain there, you'll have something like headaches, or you might have, again, the mental, emotional type of issues come up for you. When there's a blockage in the shukra artava dhatus, the male-female reproductive system, you'll have pain in the reproductive organs. Like for women, it might be breast tissue, or it might be cramps during their period, that sort of thing. All right. So there are different kind of channels or systems, tissues that this blockage can happen. But in the end, these are all different uh, localizations of how and where pain can occur according to Ayurveda. So how does this philosophy or perspective on pain, how does that affect diagnosis? Well, I have here in this uh, table here, we have on the left side here vata, which is a moving energy, pitta, which is a burning energy. Again, these are doshas here, imbalances. We have kapha, which is a congesting energy because it's earth, it's heavy, it's cold. And then we have ama, which is a clogging energy. And again, ama is toxins. So when we have excess or deficiency of these things, what can cause an excess or well, let's talk about that first. What can cause an excess or deficiency of these things? Well, for vata, it can be exposure to too much cold or too much wind or too much dryness. Like maybe somebody doesn't is always drinking caffeinated things. Caffeine dries out the body, and especially if they're not actively replenishing those fluids, their body will become dry. Also trauma, like an injury, that sort of thing. For pitta, what can increase pitta? Well, heat, any kind of heat, whether it's summertime or sunlight or spicy food, any of these things can increase pitta. For kapha, cold, damp weather, fatty fried food, right? Because those are cold, heavy, fatty fried food is a dense, heavy thing to eat, and it takes a lot of energy to process all those fat. Also lack of exercise. So if there's not the sort of heat that's generated in the body's going to become colder and damper. Mm. So again, this is how Ayurveda sees things. It's very holistic. Um, then ama, what causes issues with ama uh, accumulating in the body? Well, low agni. Agni is a digestive fire. So if your digestive fire can be diminished for various reasons, but a lot of times, eating cold food all the time, eating processed food all the time, eating a lot of really salty, really sweet, fried foods, really kind of extreme taste rather than light and simple and nourishing like vegetable soups and whole grains and that sort of thing. Also, that can decrease Agni because it kind of because you can think of it as a sort of fire. So if you put all these heavy, heavy logs on a fire, you can put out the fire. But if you give it kindling, like little sticks and leaves, and to kind of, you can actually increase the fire. So again, really heavy, extreme foods can diminish the Agni digestive fire. Also, incompatible food combinations. And again, this is from the Ayurvedic perspective. I have a whole video on Ayurvedic food combinations if you want to get into that. But when you put certain foods together, they're just difficult to digest. So, things like eating fruits with different foods, or dairy with different foods, or bean with different foods, or different kinds of proteins together, because these sorts of foods on their own are difficult to digest. So when you start stacking up all these difficult foods to digest, then it just, the body has a hard time processing all of it, especially like even one of these things can be difficult, but when you start stacking them up, it's too much. And then toxins can build up. Okay. The other thing is the buildup of metabolic waste. So if somebody isn't going to the bathroom regularly, um, every day, if they're not urinating enough or having good bowel movements, having good bowel habits, if they don't sweat enough and release toxins that way, then these toxins will accumulate in the body. Yeah. So how does this relate to symptoms? What kind of symptoms will pop up if again, vata, pitta, kapha, ama are excessive or disturbed? Well, if there's too much vata, typically what you'll see in terms of pain is you'll see pain that's intermittent. It comes and goes. It's moving like the wind. It also radiates, so it kind of fans out like the wind. Also, spasms like griping and cramping, that sort of thing. These are all vata types of pain. Tearing, throbbing, pricking, really highly sensationalized pain, like weird feelings, like it's hard to say how to explain this. Like hypersensitivity, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's a vata thing because vata is very sensitive. Vague pain because you can't see the wind, right? Even though you see the effects of wind with trees blowing and leaves blowing, you don't actually see the wind itself. Non-localized. So again, it's subtle. It's spread out like the wind. It's non-inflammatory, so it's not necessarily the pain isn't necessarily caused by inflammation, although, well, as we see, we'll look at pitta, that's pain caused by inflammation. And typically with vata pain, it will be worse with movement and with change. So if there's a vata type of pain, overuse, continuing to walk, continuing to work, continuing to like use the hands, that will increase vata because vata is moving. So if you're moving more, you're going to increase your vata, increase your wind. Also change because again, because vata, the nature of vata is that it's moving. Whenever you go through some sort of change, and it can be a life change, like you've changed a job or changed a relationship or you've moved your house or something like that, that can increase vata in the body, in the mind, and in the heart. Yeah. So if somebody has a very windy lifestyle, I like to say. So they don't have a set pattern through the day, set times that they eat and go to sleep. They skip meals. Usually my vata people, I can tell just by what they're eating that they're vata. That's usually the first thing I ask when people come to my office, like, what did you have to eat in the last 24 hours? And my people who tend to skip meals and then they're like, oh, I grabbed a protein bar and then went out and that sort of thing. I just their whole way of being, that's a very windy life. They don't even sit down for 5 or 10 minutes to like eat their food or, cook a meal, eat some soup or something like that. It's just grab and go. That's typically their habit of eating. So all of that increases vata, and so it can increase down the road over time. This vata type of pain can accumulate in the body and demonstrate itself. So now pitta, it's a fiery energy. So, think burning here. So sharp pain, burning pain, irritating, throbbing, flare-ups. People who, flare-ups like with multiple sclerosis or some autoimmune diseases, people go through flare-ups. So every few weeks or once a week, once a month, depending on where they're at with their progression of their disease, they'll have a flare-up. That's a pitta type of pain. Um, it spreads. There's inflammation. It's hot. It's red. A lot of autoimmune disorders are related to too much pitta, and pitta pain is generally worse with pressure, heat, and worse in the summertime when there's more heat. All right, so kapha, it's a congesting energy. Again, we're talking about kind of an earth energy here. This is a deep, dull, achy, constant type of pain. There's this kind of heaviness to it, like you feel like you're moving through water or quicksand sometimes. And it tends to be worse with resting and also kind of that winter springtime because winter is cold and depending on where you are in the world can be wet and then spring is usually wet. So before it gets too warm in the springtime, that's when kapha is usually at its highest point in terms of the environment. And the environment affects these things. So even if you're doing a good job with your lifestyle, if you move to a different place in the world, like maybe you originally live in a place that's cold and damp, if you move to a place that's hot and dry, you will start to become more, accumulate more vata and pitta just because of your environment. So you might have to adjust your lifestyle to accommodate that. Again, according to Ayurveda. And I've seen that with my patients. Like I put them on a good program, they're good, everything's good, and then they move and they're like, "Wait, it's not working anymore." It's because they're in a different environment. So, what else? Okay, so then ama here, this is that clogging, toxic, clogging because of toxins that accumulate. This type of pain tends to be worse near sunrise or sunset, so that change in the day on cloudy days, because clouds are sort of like a similar type of energy, right? There's lack of clarity, there's movement, there's not so much movement. You don't see the sun. The sun doesn't, come through as much with its light. That's kind of vitalizing and fiery in nature. Things kind of slow down naturally in our physical bodies, as well as our mental emotional bodies, not just for us, but usually other animals as well. Um, with ama, pain tends to move from joint to joint, and this can also involve autoimmune conditions as well. And the autoimmune condition is because sometimes the toxins, like if they're chemical toxins, maybe somebody works in a factory or something like that, or automotive industry. I see a lot of my patients like that, or some sort of manufacturing, because there's a lot of vapors and aerosols and fuelants and coolants and cleansers and all these sort of things in the air. They'll start to build up, those toxins will build up in the system, and then the immune system, uh, that disrupts the immune system. That's why disease can be under this ama category. But disease can also be under the pitta category. That type of autoimmune disease is because there's so much fire, it burns through the natural internal compartments and barriers that the immune system stays in. So the immune system is sort of like the police, they go through the body and they're like, oh, this bacteria doesn't belong here. Let's move it out and get rid of it, or this virus or whatever. But if you have so much inflammation, you break down the barriers, the natural barriers of the normal healthy tissue, then it's almost like not having good border control. Like things can go back and forth, kind of undetected, or unmonitored, let's put it that way. Again, not to get into like politics of like border control, because that's not what I meant. I'm just talking about like, like having healthy boundaries. That's all I meant there. So, all right. So that's how all of this affects our diagnosis. And I'm doing when people come in and talk about pain is all of this is like, I'm filtering through all of this in my head typically, and asking a lot of questions about what people are experiencing. And that's how I understand which dosha is predominant for the person in front of me. Once we have that diagnosis, then we get into treatment. So if somebody does, it's determined that somebody does have excess vata dosha, what do we do about it? Well, since vata is a wind energy, cold and dry, we start giving them treatments that increase heat and warmth. And since they're moving, we give them steady habits, steady pressure, that sort of thing. We don't give them more movement. I try not to give them too many things, because they're usually overwhelmed and overstimulated because they're moving, and these are like the movers and shaker type people. So you have at least with them, I try to be pretty zen about just give them two or three things, simple things they can do. And I usually also get them to rest and slow down if I can. But the nature, the nature or the lifestyle is very windy, so that can be challenging sometimes. And since the wind is cold, I try to warm up their food, both in terms of temperature, but also energetically. And if you're interested in a vata diet, I have a whole video on that. Also liquids, because vata tends to be dry, so I try to get them to nourish and moisturize the body. And oil massage is very, very good for vata, and also cleansing, but especially cleansing the colon, because vata as a dosha tends to accumulate in the colon. So a lot of my vata people tend to have constipation. So addressing that and clearing the toxins in the colon and getting movement there will help typically. So if somebody's determined to have a pitta type of pain, again, we're talking fiery burning energy here, we want to cool them down. Yeah, so even like the choice of oils and stuff, like they might do oil massage, but instead of using a hot oil like mustard oil, which I don't recommend for anybody because it's so hot. It's too hot for almost everybody. But they would use a colder oil like olive oil or coconut oil typically to cool down. Also avoiding heat, avoiding sun, avoiding chemicals, because chemicals tend to be heat producing, and introducing more cooling food into their diet. And I have a whole video on pitta diet if you're interested in that. And also cleansing, but usually focusing the cleansing on the liver because the liver is sort of like a big detox organ of the body, um, one of them. And so a lot of heat can accumulate in the liver. So if we clear out the liver, a lot of the excess pitta will clear from somebody. And that's the thing is it's kind of a two thing. You want to clear the excess pitta, but you also want to make sure there's not more pitta coming into the body because you can clear things up, but if they don't change their lifestyle, if they keep hanging out in the sun all day in the middle of summer, in the middle of the day, and they eat all this spicy food and all this kind of stuff, the pitta is just going to come back. So not only do you have to clear the accumulated pitta, but then you have to work with the person to prevent more from building up to stay, stay clear of whatever problem they're having. Then kapha. So again, this is cold, heavy earth energy. So we introduce things like dry heat, dry massage. I have a video on skin brushing. I tend to do more skin brushing with kapha people instead of oil massage because oil, even the lightest oils, are usually too uh, liquid and heavy for kapha. Dry light foods, and I have a kapha diet video if you want to hear more about that. Moving, stretching. So because kapha energy, earth energy, tends to be very steady, um, and that can be a challenge for these people because their nature is just to be quiet typically and to rest. Like there's a lot of inertia with these people, so you gotta, if you can, get them to move, and get circulation in their body and in their mind. Deep pressure because again, like they need more stimulation. If vata people need less stimulation, usually pitta people need less stimulation as well. Kapha people need more stimulation. And then when we do cleansing, usually the focus of the cleansing is the lungs because kapha energy tends to accumulate in the lungs, like olive phlegm. Phlegm is a kapha type of liquid tissue. Yeah. Then with ama, if somebody has too much ama, we want to increase agni, so the digestive fire, we do things like, ginger tea, ginger, a little bit of raw ginger with honey and lime, a pinch of that before you eat. That'll stimulate the digestive fire so you do digest your food well. Also, washing your food, combining. Um, steady pressure, dry massage. This is similar in some ways to kapha, heat, movement, stretching, steam, that sort of thing. In cleansing, and with ama, it's really mostly really a whole body cleansing because you never quite know where these toxins have built up, if they're water soluble, fat soluble toxins. So a general body cleansing is helpful there. Yeah, so that's how it affects treatments, this whole Ayurvedic perspective on pain. And we can just talk very, very briefly about one example of joint pain. So, if somebody has arthritis, um, there are different kinds of joint pain and different kinds of arthritis based on this vata, pitta, kapha, dosha perspective. So, when somebody has a vata dosha joint pain, typically what they'll experience is cold, dry joints with a lot of cracking, popping, that sort of thing. And the pain changes, it comes and goes like the wind. There's also typically degenerative changing, like in osteoarthritis, for example, where literally the degeneration process of breaking down not only the cartilage, like in a knee or something, but it's also diminishing the bone tissue. So you end up getting bone on bone, and that can be really painful. And again, typically vata pain is worse with cold and worse with movement because vata is wind energy and the wind is cold and moving. So you have to introduce other things, opposite things for them, like warmth, gentle movement, slowing down, resting, that sort of thing. So if somebody has pitta joint pain, that will look like, literally some people have hot red, burning joints, intense. There can be swelling here because the heat is breaking down the tissue and actually the fluid is accumulating to try to cool this pitta, cool this internal fire down. And pitta pain tends to be worse with more heat and more movement. So coolness, calming down, taking things down a notch, because usually pitta people are very fiery, intense people in their personality. They tend to be very goal oriented. And then all that striving, generates more heat in their body and their mind. So just to get them to drop down a gear is really important. Then we have kapha. So kapha, again, heavy earth energy, cold, dry, dull, constant achy, swelling, pain. And you can feel the swelling. I think some of you know, I used to work in rheumatology. I used to run clinical trials for a rheumatology department in one of the hospitals in Chicago. And, that's what we would do when we were, determining the effectiveness of new treatments and stuff is we would literally go around. I would do the recording. I wasn't the doctor at the time, but the doctor would go around and literally count. We'd go through the whole body and count joints, like how many joints were painful, how many joints were swollen. Like we do a whole count on the whole body. Um, so, and that kind of pain, we would ask about the pain. This would be a dull, achy, constant pain with swelling typically. And kapha pain in the joints is going to be worse with cold and rest because that's the energy of earth. So, to balance the energy of earth, you want more movement and you want heat. You want to rev things up. Gently, of course, but yeah, move them in a different direction or get them to move at all. Because movement in and of itself will generate some heat. All right, so there you go. Yeah, so there you have it, the Ayurvedic perspective on pain, um, and how it sort of influences us as practitioners in terms of diagnosing pain and then treating pain and what it looks like in a simple case with like some arthritis and that sort of thing. So, as always, I want to thank you for your time and your interest. And yeah, I do have another YouTube channel on Vedic astrology. So, the astrology of ancient India, if that's of interest to you. That's channel is called Light Vedic Astrology. I also have an online photography gallery gift shop, um, funda-goldman at fineartamerica.com. And yeah, the gift shop's it's pretty cute because not only can you get like photography prints and stuff for your wall, but my photography is used to create gifts like jigsaw puzzles and tote bags and coffee mugs and stuff like that. So if any of that's interesting, that's all out there for you. But otherwise, as always, I hope you found this interesting and useful. And until the next one, take care. Namaste.